Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Kettle on Fire bone broths are one of the products that has a permanent place on my pantry shelf. As you know, I am a big fan of making food from scratch, and I love making food with bone broth as well. Caveat, assuming you can find high-quality grass-fed and finished bones. But if you're like me, you don't always have the time and or foresight to make your own bone broth from scratch. That is why I always have some Kettle on Fire on hand for when I want a quick, delicious, high-quality bone broth. Their broths are always made with organic veggies, herbs, and spices, and they only use grass-fed and finished beef bones and pasture-raised chicken bones. They never use anything artificial, no preservatives, no coloring, no flavorings, no junk ever. That is why I'm happy to be partnering with them for my podcast. They are a company that I can rely on to make high-integrity products. As a listener, you can save 25% off any of their products at kettleonfire.com. Just use code JUSTINGREDIENTS at checkout. That is kettleonfire.com. KETTLEANDFIRE.com. Danielle Walker is a 3 times New York Times bestselling author, health advocate, and self-trained chef. After being diagnosed with an extreme case of an autoimmune disease, ulcerative colitis, at 22, Danielle made it her personal mission to take control of her life, effectively manage her symptoms through lifestyle and diet without sacrificing her passion for great tasting, healthy food. Over 10 years, thousands of recipes, and 3 New York Times best-selling cookbooks, Danielle has become a beacon of hope in the autoimmune world, helping millions of readers suffering from disease, allergies, or chronic ailments, and find freedom and experience through deep healing. Over 10 years, thousands of recipes, and 3 New York Times best-selling cookbooks, Danielle has become a beacon of hope in the autoimmune world, helping millions of readers suffering from disease, allergies, or chronic ailments find freedom and experience deep healing. Now, in Food Saved Me, Danielle pens her first memoir, reflecting on the journey that brought her here, a decade-long cycle of diagnosis, trauma, debilitating sickness, remission, recovery, setbacks, hope, and healing. Danielle's resilience in the face of sickness and loss led her to new ways of cooking, which ultimately redeemed her health and the ideal of hospitality. Through her trials, tribulations, and triumphs, you'll find that no matter your ailment, there is hope. Hope that you can live a full, happy, and healthy life without ever feeling hungry, excluded, or deprived. Because the truth is, food can radically change our lives for the better. Thank you, Danielle, so much for being on the show. I'm so excited to talk to you about your health journey because it's quite a remarkable health journey. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell my listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you became interested in healthy living.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called ulcerative colitis when I was 22 years old, almost 14 years ago. And actually exactly 14 years ago. And I suffered for years, just in and out of hospitals, and was put on a lot of different medications that unfortunately, while some did help control some of the symptoms, the side effects were almost more debilitating than the disease. And ultimately, long story short, that's written all in this new book, Food Saved Me, found that food could make a significant impact on the symptoms, just the day-to-day kind of well-being and my lifestyle.
Wow, you were young when you were diagnosed with that.
I was, yeah. My husband and I had just gotten married. We were like 8 weeks into our marriage when I was diagnosed.
Oh, that's a hard trial.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so let's tell my listeners what ulcerative colitis is.
Yeah, it's an autoimmune disease that causes inflammation in the colon specifically, and it results in actual open ulcers. That's why it's called that, throughout the entire colon. And it also causes malabsorption. Those ulcers end up bleeding internally. And so people that have the disease tend to get really anemic, low weight because of not being able to absorb nutrients, lots of other things, lots of pain. And, it can ebb and flow. It goes through what people call flare-ups. So you can go through 6 months, a year, 2 years, everybody's a bit different, feeling okay. And then all of a sudden it can flare up and kind of rear its ugly head. And there's lots of varying degrees to the severity of it. I actually have a family member that has it that's fairly mild. I know people that have it like I do, where I've nearly lost my life from it and been hospitalized, having to have blood transfusions, really high doses of medication. So it really can kind of vary just depending on the individual.
Okay, so I'm curious to know, did you just all of a sudden start having symptoms, or was this years of symptoms? How did you know something was wrong?
Yeah, it pretty much came on overnight. About 6 months before my wedding, I was graduating college and we were getting ready to move. My fiance, my husband now at the time, and he was about to start law school. There's just a lot going on. And so I did kind of notice some stomach just upset, but nothing that felt really out of the ordinary. But that 2 months after our wedding, I just felt like the symptoms kind of came on full speed overnight. And I went to the ER and wasn't diagnosed there. It ultimately took, I think, 4 or 5 different specialists to finally get a true diagnosis, but it wasn't something that I, grew up with. It wasn't something that I spent years and years trying to find a diagnosis for. It really did feel like it just came out of nowhere.
Oh, that's interesting. So when you say it came out of nowhere, what were those symptoms?
Yes. Well, ulcerative colitis symptoms are not very pretty to talk about. I always tell people, if you really want to know, you can Google it. It's probably one of the most embarrassing diseases that a young newlywed woman could ever, fathom getting. It's all digestive. And so it can be, really, really bad cramps that can make you just have to lay down on the ground. They're so bad, just abdominal cramping. And, very high amounts of bowel movements with bleeding, not being able to just keep anything down, losing weight very, very quickly, sometimes 20 to 30 pounds within 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Just joint pain from all the inflammation. I mean, there's a whole slew of things. Mine always ending up in anemia, which then caused kind of this other long laundry list of symptoms that I was experiencing just from being low on iron and my hemoglobin blood count. So, but it's a laundry list of side effects and symptoms.
Okay, so you said you went to the hospital, but you weren't diagnosed there. You went to a few more
Right.
doctors. How were you finally diagnosed?
Yeah, I go through it in the book just about how many different doctors I had to go to, how I had to learn really quickly, and my husband as well, because he was with me at all of those appointments, just about becoming an advocate for your own health. And, I saw multiple gastroenterologists, which they focus on the gut. They treat people with Crohn's and colitis and celiac and other, digestive diseases all the time. And I think it took 3 for one to finally even do a colonoscopy, which, is an internal kind of test to really get a look in there. And looking back on it, we didn't know to ask, for those tests. We were young and we had no idea what was going on. But it took quite some time and a lot of different appointments to finally figure it out.
So 3 doctors before you got a colonoscopy.
Mm-hmm.
That is crazy to me. I
I
can't
know,
believe
you'd
that
think it
wouldn't
would be
be.
their first.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Wow. Okay, so is a colonoscopy the best test then to find this?
For ulcerative colitis, I believe so, from what I understand. They can do an endoscopy, I think, as well, where they, go in from the top as opposed from the bottom. But that was the quickest way to be able to see what was going on in there. There's a lot of blood tests now that I realize that you can run just to check inflammation levels, which are very indicative of different autoimmune diseases. So there were some, even preliminary tests that I'm surprised were never run even before the colonoscopy was done to, take biopsies and actually make sure that that's what it was.
And looking back, do you know why they didn't run the test?
I have
Or no?
no idea still. No, it baffles me. You'll read kind of all about my frustration because I hear it echoed from so many people. I don't know if it's because I was a young 22-year-old woman that looked, otherwise healthy. And if they just weren't taking me seriously, if they thought, it was just kind of something that was just going to go away, I was told, to do everything from adding a cup of oat bran for fiber to my shakes, to getting like an over-the-counter Metamucil, to just, doctors saying, just wait it out. So it was a lot of trying to get answers at the beginning. And I don't know why they didn't run the tests, honestly.
Well, and I love that you say you have to become an advocate for yourself, because it's so true. Because I went in my health journey, I was dealing with depression, and I went to doctor after doctor after doctor. And when I finally found a good doctor, well, one that could help me, she was like, well, we need to test your vitamin D and your B vitamins, and we need to look at your hormones and, this whole slew of things. And I'm like, what tests have you been done already? And I'm like, none. In 2 years of trying to find help for depression, not a single doctor ran a test. But I didn't know at the time. I didn't realize that those were root causes of depression. So I understand your frustration, and now being like, I don't know why they didn't test. Like, can you believe it?
And it's unfortunate, I write a lot about in the book how I've come to have an appreciation for Western medicine and for, the healing properties of food and managing your stress and your mental health and all of those things. But it's still frustrating to me to this day that the first inclination of most of the doctors that I saw was just to write me a prescription, even if it was the Metamucil over the counter, or upwards to steroids and things like that. But it was never, let's run tests to see about your different, levels on all these different things, so that we can maybe figure out why this is happening, so that then we can treat it properly. Right. It was just kind of this one size fits all prescription right off the bat, but not testing any of those vitamin levels, anything like that, to see, and tailor my specific treatment for what was actually happening internally.
Well, and I've learned over the years that that's bringing Western medicine and Eastern medicine together.
Yeah.
And I'm a big advocate of that, because I have a lot of family members in the Western medicine world. And so I get that world, but I also love the Eastern world type of medicine. So I just wish we would merge the two a little bit together.
I do too.
Use the best of both worlds.
I agree. They're not mutually exclusive. I think there's a place for both. And I think they can really actually, be able to heighten each other. When you use one, I think it can make the other more effective, and, vice versa. So yes, I agree. I wish that there wasn't such a divide on the treatments there.
Right. I definitely agree. Okay. So you were diagnosed, and they just gave you a prescription then. And the prescription was to heal it, or just to cover up the symptoms?
Cover up the symptoms. Yeah, I was diagnosed, and, I just remember saying, what does this mean? And he said, well, it's not curable. I said, okay. And he said, but, take this medication and this medication. I think at that point he prescribed me 2. And he said, you'll be able to live a completely normal life. So yeah, it was to be able to manage the symptoms.
And so was there anything about lifestyle changes at all, or just the prescription?
Nope, just the prescriptions at that point. That point, leaving the hospital, I'd been there for a couple of days. I felt like I left there with no more information than I came in with, other than this 2-word ulcerative colitis diagnosis. Like, I didn't hear the words autoimmune disease. I was not talked to at all about what life might look like, other than take these and you'll be normal. Nothing about food or stress or sleep, or even as, simple as, hey, we just gave you antibiotics and did a colonoscopy. You should try to take some probiotics and repopulate your gut. Nothing other than the prescriptions. That was it.
And did those prescriptions help manage the symptoms, or not really?
Not really, a bit coming out of the hospital, especially because the symptoms were pretty acute at that point. And so there were some improvements in some of the symptoms, but unfortunately, one of the medications just made all of the other things just skyrocket, all of the side effects that I wasn't told about actually when I was sent home with the medication. And so I felt like I had 15 or 20 more symptoms that were kind of added on top of the disease symptoms. So I felt worse in all. It might've been controlling the symptoms of the disease itself, but I came out feeling much worse.
Oh, that's so frustrating. And you hear that often from people. Yeah. They're trying their best, but it's not a one fit all for everybody.
Right.
So, okay. So were you frustrated at this point? Is this what led you to trying to figure out more on your own?
Yeah, I had started asking pretty early on if food could help. And every doctor that I saw said food couldn't help cure, or it didn't cause it. And I just felt like there has to be another way, so whether it's a different medication that doesn't have so many side effects, or there's something else I can be doing, to try to lessen the inflammation and just trying to kind of lessen the symptoms, then I've got to find something else, because it was not the normal that I had dreamt up as a newlywed and had planned, my whole life, my future. I just knew that there was no way I could live like that.
Okay, so I'm dying to know what food changes you had to make then. What food changes did you find that helped your symptoms?
Yeah. It was a very slow process. And again, in Food Saved Me, I kind of write out everything because I really wanted people to see the journey that I had to go on to figuring out what was best for my body, because I think that's what's so important. Is it's just like medications, food and diet and lifestyle is also not a one size fits all, and it takes a lot of nuancing. But I ultimately, after doing an elimination diet with kind of a more natural practitioner in San Francisco, found that all of my food sensitivities looked really closely to a paleo diet. So I was cutting grains and dairy and legumes and processed sugars. And at that point, even a little more intense in cutting nuts and seeds and nightshades, which are tomatoes, peppers, eggplant. And those are all known kind of inflammatory foods. And so we started there. And with that food kind of elimination, I noticed a 75% improvement in my symptoms within 48 hours. I
Oh,
walked into her
wow.
office so sick, and I was, journaling and keeping track of my symptoms, and I saw them decrease by that much and that quickly. And so that was like my turning point, and what I ended up sticking with for the most part.
So I'm curious, did you ever add some of those foods back in, or you completely avoid those still?
Yes, I did. So that was about 12 years ago. There's been a few things. I've been off of grains and gluten for 12 plus years. A dairy I was off of for a few years, and her kind of mentality of it was, give your body some time to heal and give your gut some time to heal. And over the years, I've noticed I can tolerate different things. So for instance, I can't do any cow's milk, cream, things like that, but cheeses that are aged, where the lactose is pretty much gone, goat's milk and sheep's milk type cheeses or yogurts, their protein structure is quite different than cow's milk. And so I've found that my body can tolerate those a bit better. Legumes never have been added back in, and, processed foods and sugars I've kept out. I've stuck pretty closely over the last 12 years to kind of that paleo framework with some specific nuances that fit best for me.
That's really interesting. So do you ever have a processed food, or you just completely stay away from it?
I'm like, I mean, I will get every once in a while with my kids, we'll get like a gluten-free baked good, which I guess you could consider processed, and it would have, refined sugar in it.
Right.
But we don't buy anything in the house. And when I'm eating out, I don't do that either. I'm like trying to rack my brain. I mean, it's never been a perfect journey. Gluten, I have not touched ever since then, because I know that it's too risky for
Right.
me.
Right.
But yeah, no, I mean, I have to have things here and there, especially if I'm traveling and things like that.
Okay, so gluten and dairy were the big culprits. Oh, and legumes.
Yeah. And grains, really. It
Oh, yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
just, it wasn't just gluten. I tried gluten free at first and noticed kind of minimal improvement, but it was all grains that I ended up having to cut out, which, wheat, rye, barley, rice. I mean, there's a whole long laundry list. Amaranth. I mean, quinoa is not technically a grain, but we cut that as well. And I had to learn what a grain was. If you asked me, I could not list them out. I had no idea.
That's actually how I was at first when I started my
Yeah,
health journey. So I tell people you can do it. You can learn
you can.
one little thing at a
Yes.
time.
Yep, it is. It's a learning curve, but if you're determined to do it, you definitely can. You have to start somewhere.
Exactly. So have you added any grains back in, or are you still off all grains?
Yeah, I am. I'm off grains still. I always am honest about it. I like my kids. So my kids eat gluten-free 100% of the time, but they are able to tolerate some grains, mostly rice. And so if I get something for them that has like rice flour in it, I will take a bite. It's not like I know I can't eat a lot of it because it will make me sick, but I definitely test the boundaries, especially over this many years. But everything that I make, every recipe that I make, every meal that I make is grain free.
So you've had to go on a real trial and error type
Yeah.
diet and figuring out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, I have, and trial and error in creating the recipes. I mean, if you see me now as a 4-time cookbook author and a blogger, it seems like I've kind of always had it right, but it was quite a journey and quite a process, not only to figuring out what worked for me and keeping a food journal and really looking at, what I ate and the correlation of the symptoms, but then getting into the kitchen and not having any guidelines or framework. I mean, there weren't any books at that point to teach you how to cook that way. And everything that I knew growing up in an Italian family and, all my mom's and my grandma's recipe cards, I mean, I couldn't eat any of the things that were listed on there. So it took a lot of trial and error on that side of things too, to be able to really enjoy the food and to feel like I could get my life back.
Well, I'm just sitting here thinking, wow, I would have a hard time in the kitchen. I need your cookbooks because everything, I stay away from gluten. I don't do well with gluten, but I do use oat flour a lot.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, oh, I would have to readjust a lot of stuff that I cook.
Yeah.
So
yes,
I'm going to talk to you about your cookbooks in just a second because I'm now fascinated with that and what you're cooking. But I want to ask you a couple things. So while you were healing from this colitis, what did you learn about healing your gut?
Yeah, I've learned a lot over the years, and I feel like I'm always learning. I'm still learning. With autoimmune disease, I think with any chronic illness, you have setbacks and you have bumps, and it hasn't been a perfect journey for me. And I was able to be really honest about all of those things in the book. But I've learned that, inflammation is the biggest proponent. I mean, it's like you have to try to keep the inflammation down, especially for healing your gut. And for people with UC, with Crohn's, even with, something like just gut permeability, making everything that you eat just as easy as possible on your gut for digestion. So, specifically when I was having flare-ups of all cooked vegetables, cooked fruits, things that your gut doesn't have to process as much. And then doing things like eating tons and tons of soup with homemade bone broth with like healing gelatin in it and collagen, so that your gut kind of gets almost like this little extra cushion, this extra love. To the things like, repopulating the gut bacteria, which also helps your immune system, just so much. And then really, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I've learned, and especially over the last few years, is just how much stress and lack of sleep and not processing, emotional trauma can affect your gut, right? I think people always say, you get like a stomach ache when you're nervous, or if you're feeling overly stressed, you can kind of feel it in your stomach for a lot of people. And I think that's so real and true. And it's just like this kind of innate feeling of like, oh, my stomach feels off because I've, got butterflies or whatnot. And so I've learned too, just to be able to have really good gut health, I also have to look at all of the other aspects of my life.
I love that you say that because a lot of people think, oh, it's just food that affects the gut, but really stress is terrible on the gut. And so many people are just dealing with so much stress these days. And then even lack of sleep, not enough sleep, because sleep is when our digestive system rests and it needs that rest. And so without enough sleep, that can also cause a lot of gut issues. So I do love that you said repopulate with good bacteria, because that is so good. Like probiotics and probiotics. Yep. So can you eat probiotic rich food?
I can. Yeah. So when I'm in, especially because I have a digestive disease, when I'm in what they call a flare up, eating too much fermented foods, sauerkraut and kimchi or, kefir can be a little hard to digest. So I'll switch to kind of a supplement there, but I'm pretty diligent in making sure that I get some sort of probiotic kind of rich food in my diet every day. And then I do take a supplement on top of it, just especially because with UC, it's hard to absorb things. But I've always found it fascinating, that the United States is pretty much the only culture in the world that doesn't have like a cultured food, as a probiotic rich food as kind of just part of like their daily diet. I feel like everywhere you look, there's something that's been eaten for generations and generations that is fermented. And I think it's so important for our gut health.
I do too. I wish it was in more of our common meals, like you said.
Yes. But I mean, even just a couple tablespoons of some sauerkraut on the side or, whatever it is. And people turn their noses up to it because it's sour, it's yogurt, it's kefir, it's all those things that do have a little bit of a zing to them, but they're so good for you.
Yeah. Well, maybe you and I can make it more common for people.
Yes. Yes.
Well, and I love that you said that you do bone broth, because I'm a big advocate of that, like just in soups and cooking meat and potatoes. I love to cook my
Yeah.
quinoa in bone broth. So
Yep.
I love hearing that that was something do you do it on a daily basis or?
I do. I mean, I try to do the best I can. I will say, like, it's always easier for me during the winter, to sip
Right.
on a mug of bone broth or to eat a bowl of soup. And usually during the summers and when it's hot, I don't do as well as I would like to. But yeah, I really try to get it at least every day. And if not, a couple scoops of collagen, even though it's not as bioavailable and I don't feel like it has as many vital nutrients that bone broth has. But yes, I mean, I constantly have it in my freezer. I think we're so lucky now because we can actually buy, gelatin, collagen rich bone broth in the store these days. So if you don't have time to make it, it's so easy to access. And yeah, I mean, I grew up just using like a can of chicken broth that had, I don't think much, if any, nutritional value, and definitely wasn't jelly, when it was
Right.
cold. And I learned about how important that was in kind of my earlier days of trying all of the different food things.
Well, I love though that bone broth has become more common. So
Yeah, almost trendy.
it is trendy. So that's a good thing.
That's
We're going to
okay.
make these
Yeah.
foods trendy.
Yep. Yep. That's a good thing.
Okay, talking about supplements, let's talk about supplements for a minute. When you were healing or on your journey of healing, did you take supplements to help out?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of an up and down road for supplements for me. And I get to kind of go in on that a little bit more too. And food saved me. And just about, in the earlier days, I had people throwing lists of what supplements worked well for them. Right. And because I was so just kind of frantic and trying to figure out what could work, I would take everything that they said. And there were no, dosages that were up or down depending on my body weight or my age. I just did what people told me to, and it didn't work with practitioners at the beginning. And I think some things made things worse. And it was really hard to be able to really pinpoint and tell when you're taking, 20 new things as well as trying to change your diet. And so they've been an integral part of, healing over the years, but it's always constantly being nuanced. And thankfully I have, a functional medicine practitioner that I work with now. But yeah, the gut healing supplements, the probiotics, inflammatory type things like, cod liver oil and other things like that, just to help my body be able to balance naturally, if you will, because there's only so much you can eat all the food, but I mean, you have to get a lot of things in, like leafy greens and a lot of fish and a lot, to really be able to get the levels that sometimes people need. And especially for somebody that has ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, where you're not absorbing those nutrients, as readily, or if you can't keep much food down. And so, yeah, supplements have been, I think, a big part of the journey as well.
So you still take supplements today then, obviously.
Yeah, I do. I do. It ebbs and flows. Again, it's, I take more when I'm feeling like there's symptoms or, there things are starting to kind of go downhill, but I take a few that, just kind of like baseline.
Are there supplements that you want to share that you think are really good for those with ulcerative colitis, or does it really just depend on each person?
Yeah, I'm always hesitant to share only because I do think people really need to try to work with somebody to figure out what works for them. But there are a few. There's L-glutamine that I've taken for years that just helps to kind of heal and keep the gut lining healthy. I've taken fish oil for many years because I do like to eat fish, but I don't think I get nearly enough of it. And I take a raw cod liver oil because most of the fish oil capsules don't have, from what I understand, nearly enough to help, counterbalance that anti-inflammatory kind of response that we get from too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3 in our diets. And then there's one other one that I felt like was a kind of a game changer a couple of years ago, and it's called butyrate.
Yes.
So good for the gut. And I learned over the years, I was researching it, and typically when people with UC are tested for butyrate levels, like I guess they're usually really low. And so I started taking that probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I do feel like it is helpful. I mean, again, it's not, one supplement hasn't made like a complete, 180 difference, but I think they all have been working kind of hand in hand.
Oh, I love that you shared those. In fact, I just talked to a doctor who deals with autoimmune issues, and he said a lot of people with autoimmune issues are very low in butyrate. And so
yeah,
I love that you just shared that.
Yeah. Yeah. I also take CBD at night to help my just de-stress and kind of make sure that I get good sleep. But yeah, I feel like there's so many different ones, and it is a little bit of kind of unchartered waters for a lot of people, and you can just go buy anything that you want
Right.
and just start taking it. So I think you do have to be careful. I mean, just there's supplements, but there still are things that you're putting in your body, and you could kind of equate it similarly to, a medication, just going and taking a medication willy-nilly. So I do think it's important to like really watch, what the effects are on your body.
Right. And to definitely work with their doctor on what's best
Yes.
for their body.
Yep.
So I am really interested to talk to you about the cookbooks because
Yeah.
just cooking for a family every night, I am fascinated with this. So you've released 3 New York Times bestselling cookbooks of foods that are good for your gut.
Yeah.
How did you go about creating all of these recipes? That's what I want to know.
I had a lot of determination. I will say that when I was diagnosed and when I first changed my diet, I mean, I think at that point we're talking, I might've been 24 when I started my food blog. And, I just felt like I didn't have a lot of hope at that point that I would be able to enjoy and do all the things that I loved. I grew up in a family where both my mom and both my grandmas, they showed their heart and their love by the food that they put on the table. And they all had very different cooking styles. My mom was very much like the convenient cooker, lots of canned soups and packaged things. But regardless, she still had food on the table because she loved to gather our family together. And my grandma was the same, although she cooked everything from scratch, like the classic Italian grandma, but I had dreams of being able to do that. I wanted to be able to host and have people around my table. I wanted to be able to do traditions with my kids that I grew up doing, like baking cookies and brownies and gingerbread houses, and, those types of things. And when I first started eating this way, I was just kind of living off of very bland food, like steamed broccoli and, grilled chicken with nothing on it and grilled salmon with nothing on it. And I just was like, okay, this is okay for right now. But if I need to eat this way for the rest of my life, which it was pretty clear at that point that this was a lifestyle, it wasn't, a 30-day fix. This was like, I need to do this for eternity, that I had to make it sustainable, and making it sustainable for me was good food. So I got into the kitchen and I just, a lot of trial and error, but I would take, my grandma's recipes or my mom's or something that I saw online, and I would swap out ingredients that I knew I couldn't have and would swap in ingredients that I knew I could have. And, I mean, there were loaves of pumpkin bread that came out feeling like a brick, but but then it got better and better. And I started really learning kind of the different properties of the ingredients and how they performed in the recipes. And yeah, but that got me into the kitchen.
I love that. It was just out of desire. And I would be the
Yeah.
same way. Like, I want to eat healthy, good, delicious food the rest of my
Yes.
life, not the bland stuff
Yeah.
you were talking about. So, your
Yeah.
cookbooks, do they have everything from snacks to meals to desserts?
Yeah, they do. They're all 4 a little bit different. My first one, it's everything. It's from breakfast straight through to some cocktails and mocktails, some kid-friendly items, quick dinners, lots of baked goods. I have one book that's dedicated to easy weeknight meals, so that might be something that you would enjoy. And the thing about the recipes is they are made and built to be able to feed anybody. They're not, just for people who have to eat a certain way. They're just supposed to be really delicious, and they have great flavors and textures. And I've always been really adamant that I test my recipes on somebody who can eat, all the gluten in the world and all the sugar in the world, and somebody who has to eat really restrictive, and that on every side and in between, they all will just love the food. And so, yeah, there's a holiday book that, is an entire Thanksgiving spread that's all gluten and grain free and free of sugars and dairy and Christmas treats. And, I mean, yeah, it kind of runs the gamut, and pretty much anything that you miss or think you'd miss, you should be able to find in there.
That's amazing. When you said anybody likes them, anybody can eat these, it's not just for
Yeah.
those with gut issues. I'm thinking, well, it's actually how we should all be eating. Really. I
Yes,
mean,
I
it's
think so.
anti-inflammatory. They are foods that are healing to the gut. I mean, these are really good for everybody.
Yeah, and it's just real food, I mean, I think that's the thing that I've always loved about the way that I was kind of forced to eat. But nobody was telling me to go buy special shakes or, packaged bars or frozen, meals that had only certain things in it. It was just real food that I could pick up from the grocery store and create something, beautiful and tasty with. And yeah, I mean, I think everybody would benefit from eating that way a little more frequently, even if it was not every day of the week, just a few would help.
Right. Well, I love trying to teach others that whole foods are really nourishing to the body, and that's you're
Yeah.
using all whole foods for these recipes. So
Yeah.
I'm really interested about the baked goods though. How did you were you nervous with your condition to try baked goods? Like, were you afraid they would hurt your gut and cause inflammation issues?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't, only because this book that I first started making food from, because it was laying out kind of the way to eat for ulcerative colitis and celiac and Crohn's. It had some baked goods in there that used, almond flour and coconut flour. And instead of butter, it was, using coconut oil and things like that. And so looking at the ingredients, I'm like, okay, well, I can eat all of these things. They say I could eat some almonds if I wanted, and I could eat some coconut. And so, I think all of these things combined should be okay. And so, yeah, I wasn't nervous so much about it hurting my body as I was about them not tasting good or falling like flat, sinking in the middle, those types of things. But even still, over the years, I do a lot of fun treats, and especially because I have 3 kids. But when I'm not feeling well, my body still really just likes the simpler foods. I mean, even honey and maple syrup, those are natural sweeteners, but they're still sugar. And, too much almond flour, coconut flour is a lot of fiber. So yeah, I mean, I think it has to still be in moderation. I think that's the one thing I've always said. Yes, these are healthier versions, but it's, I'm still not going to sit down and eat 12 almond flour cookies just because, they're a healthier version. Those could still make my body hurt just from the sheer volume of it. Right. So I still eat them, in moderation and for celebrations and things like that.
I love that you say in moderation, because really that's how we should all be eating the
All
baked
life,
goods,
yeah. Yeah, no matter what kind of baked goods they are. Yeah, it's not, it's not an every meal thing. It's
Right.
it's a fun treat, celebratory thing.
And it's a better choice treat when you're having a treat.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Right.
okay. As you were talking about almond flour and coconut flour, things like that, I went right to the finances. I was like, oh, that's pricey
Yeah.
stuff. So, what about those that are trying to cook on a budget? Can they cook like you do?
Yeah. So I think here's the thing. Yes, the baked good, honey, almond flour, coconut flour is actually relatively inexpensive. So I would go for that one if you're going to try to do some baked goods. But those things, I think once you stock your pantry, and again, if you're saving those kind of for more special occasions, I think that will help significantly reduce the budget. I also, I like to say, first of all, I spend so much less on medical bills and medications than I do now than I used to. And that's not going to always equate for people. So I don't think that's like, the answer, and it's not going to make it better for everybody. But I do think that you can utilize shopping, smartly. I think there's a lot less waste, in my opinion, when you're cooking with whole real foods, because you use them, the whole thing, and you're using them in other dishes. But yeah, I think that the baked goods are the most expensive thing. I also think, quality proteins. I'm very much a proponent for grass-fed meats and organic chicken. But I also think that if you are cutting out refined processed foods and sugars and grains, and you need to do conventional, meats and vegetables and fruits, you're still eating real foods. And if that's the best that you can do on your budget, then that's a huge step forward still. And so I do think it's doable. I also think, compared to what I used to have to pay for those ingredients in the early days, they are so much more affordable than they used to be, because there's such a demand for them, and they're so much more accessible. And you can buy them in bulk and online. And, so things like that, I think, can really help.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because years ago, some of that stuff, coconut flour was so expensive, and now
It
you
was so
can find it
expensive.
like at Walmart,
Yeah,
so
it's like a quarter of the price than it used to be.
right. So it's definitely doable. And I found out on my health journey, when I first started switching to whole foods and whole food ingredients, I was like, my grocery bill actually has decreased
Less.
from not
Yeah.
buying all of the packaged processed
Yes.
foods. I was shocked, because you
Yeah.
always think eating healthier equates to more money. And it really doesn't
true.
if you're smart about it.
It's true. And I will say, I've actually, when you say, like, do you eat processed things, there's a lot of paleo brands now that have made life a lot easier for a lot of us. You can get a salad dressing made with avocado oil and no sugar now, and you can buy, grain-free crackers and cookies and things, but those items are very expensive. And so, I think you have to really kind of pick and choose your convenience. You're going to pay more for convenience, even if it's a healthier version. And, but your time, you may not have the time to make those things. And so you kind of have to weigh them. But yeah, I feel like I hear that a lot. Those packaged foods are actually really expensive. And I think people are led to think that it's cheaper, when it's already all packaged and done for you. But you're paying for the labor of something to be cooked. I mean, even so much as buying pre-cut vegetables in a grocery store, I mean, they can be 3 times the price than just a whole vegetable. Or, buying chicken breast that's boneless, skinless is probably 2 to 3 times the amount of just actually buying the whole chicken itself, and getting multiple parts and the bones to make the broth. So you do have to change your mentality about the way you shop, for sure.
And it comes down to convenience versus money sometimes as well.
Yes.
So
exactly. And sometimes it's a trade-off, I mean, especially if you're busy with kids and you don't have the time to make those things, but you can afford to buy the pre-packaged ones, then that saves you time and stress, and it could be worth it.
Right. So if someone is listening to this and they're like, okay, I think I have just gut issues, because it doesn't have to be Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. I mean, it can be a variety of gut issues. So your cookbook is for all gut issues. And so if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, where do I even start at the grocery store? What are tips that you would give them?
Yeah. And first, I would say it's not even just for gut issues, although most ailments do kind of start, I feel like, with inflammation, and a lot of them start in the gut. But I've included testimonials in Food Saved Me from people that have written in that food and the way that I write my recipes has helped everything from MS, multiple sclerosis, to rheumatoid arthritis, to, families with children with kids on the spectrum, to debilitating migraines. I mean, just this slew of things. So I feel like it's not just, something that you would immediately think, oh, that's a digestive disease. It's a lot of things. But I would say, I think starting with a 30-day elimination diet is a really great place to start, because it gives your body time to heal. And it also gives your brain time to really look at that 30 days and see, if there's been improvement, which I would almost bet my life that if you do a 30-day elimination and cut those things out, that you will see improvement in your symptoms. I mean, even if you don't have something that's severe as an autoimmune disease, aches and pains and better sleep and brain fog and all those things that people say go away when they cut out grains and dairy and processed foods. So I've got some starting lists in Food Save Me of just kind of bullet points of, here's what you could start with cutting out. And then, you might be able to add some of those foods back in. You might find that your body does okay with oats, or maybe it just does okay with rice, or it does okay with the goat's milk cheese, but you can't know those things until you cut them all out and then add them one at a time and really see, what your body's responding to.
Well, and I love that you talked about your recipes helping like MS and arthritis and spectrum, things like that, because it's just an anti-inflammatory diet.
Right.
And so bringing down that inflammation and all those other health issues can really help. So thank you for sharing that. And talking about your book, so your new book that you just released is called Food Saved Me. And so I've heard you mention it a few times. So tell my listeners a little bit about that book.
Yeah, it's my first book that's not in the cookbook category. There's about 5 recipes at the back, just because I talk about kind of the creation of them or how important they were, to my healing journey. And so Food Saved Me it's my story, but more than anything, it was written to give others hope that are walking a similar journey, from anything from, chronic illness to autoimmune disease, to even, we talked briefly in there about child loss that we went through, and just how all of those things, can affect our lives, but that we can't, and we don't have to let them rule and dictate what our life is like, and how we have to be able to advocate for our health and our well-being and our happiness, and that we can find hope and light throughout those dark times. It's also kind of a blueprint, for what I did to figure it all out, but also sharing the hard times and the difficult times, or the times that I needed to use medication, just to give people a really honest viewpoint of what life looks like with chronic illness. My husband also wrote a chapter at the end that I'm really happy that he did, just as somebody who's walked with me, from newlyweds for 14 years now. We just had our 14-year anniversary, and walking through, the loved one or the caregiver of somebody who deals with those things, and what it looks like and how you can best help them, but also how you can really take care of yourself. He talked a lot in there about how he needed to take care of his mental health and his emotional health as I was going through those hard times, and that he couldn't be depleted in his own right, or he couldn't help take care of me and the kids. And so I love what he wrote just as a support to people going through that.
I love that, because as you were talking about that, I was like, oh, my husband could write a chapter on how he supported me through my depression, because the other side doesn't really get talked about. And so I love that he spoke up and told what it's like, because it's a hard journey for them as well.
It is. And I think sometimes when you're going through it, and, I don't know if you would say the same, but it's really hard sometimes to see outside of what you're going through. And when you're able to look back, you can see, but if for me, I didn't even know that he was struggling. I knew it was probably hard for him to watch me go through this, and it was probably frustrating. But he would, tell me years after, when I first got diagnosed, that he'd come home from the hospital after taking care of me, take care of our infant son, and then he would sit on the stairs and cry at night. And to me, he was just this solid, rock that was supporting us all. And I never saw him falter. And I'm so happy that he was honest about what it feels like to go through that, as the person that's walking with them, because I think there's always, for anybody that's suffering with, disease or chronic ailments or depression, there's somebody that's next to them that's, watching them go through it, and that's helping support them. So,
right. Oh, I'm so glad he wrote that.
Yeah, I am too.
So, okay, so people can buy this book and read about your journey. And I'm assuming in this journey, you give tips of where to start and what helped you best, and things that have helped you along the journey, things like that.
Yeah. I have some really kind of just getting started guides in the back. And, with the cookbooks, I was never really able to dig in deep to this story. I was able to share bits and pieces and give you recipes to start, but not really give kind of like here's your jumping off point. And so I was able to include all of that in here.
And so really anyone with really any health issues would benefit from this book, because we've discussed it's anti-inflammatory, which helps so many health issues.
Yeah, I do. I think it's written, anybody that's gone through anything, whether it's health or just any hardship, I think will find hope from it. And I think, and then on the flip side, anybody who wants to know what it's like in the shoes of somebody they love that's walking through those things can read it and have a much better insight, because we suffer in silence a lot. I think especially as women, and if we're moms, we just kind of power through things, and we don't always tell people what it feels like to go through the thing that we're going through. And so I'm hoping that, somebody who feels like they're isolated or alone or not understood could also hand that book to somebody, their spouse or their parent or their neighbor, and say, like, this is what I go through. And that person in turn can know how to better support them.
I am so glad you wrote this book. I can't wait to read it, because it just sounds like something that so many people could relate to right now, because there's so many dealing with autoimmune issues and gut issues and health issues. So thank you so much for just being vulnerable and telling your story. It will be really helpful to others.
I hope so.
So thank you so much for sharing your story with me and my listeners. And I really appreciate you taking the time. I always end my podcast by asking my guests what they have found to be the best ingredient to life. What have you found that to be?
I mean, joy for me. I would say I was going to try to come up with the food ingredient, because that is what I do. But I think just always searching for the joy is my best ingredient for life, because it's what keeps you going, and it's what gives you purpose to go another day, especially when you're going through hard things.
Yeah, especially when you're going through dark times. I do know that, because as a 22-year-old, when you were going through your struggles, joy was probably really hard to find.
It was incredibly hard to find, but I kind of always kept my eyes on it, and even through my setbacks, like I always look ahead to, even if I can't feel it in that moment, I try to imagine myself in a couple of months or a few months, and plan something that will bring me joy, whether it's like, setting my sights on going on a family vacation, or being able to take a walk, or, something that I can grasp onto that I know brought me joy in the past. And I try to look for that in the future so that I keep moving forward.
I love that, because it is the joy in the future that keeps us moving forward.
It is. And it can be found. I think that's the one thing that's hard to realize when you're going through it, but it can come back even if you don't feel like it will.
It definitely can. So tell my listeners where they can find you and where they can find all of these amazing cookbooks and your new book.
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram at Danielle Walker. My website, daniellewalker.com, also has tons of free recipes if you just want to get a little sneak peek. All of my books, cookbooks, and then the new one, Food Saved Me, you can find anywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, all of those, your independent bookstores, of course. But yeah, those are the best places to find me.
I am so excited to try some of these recipes and share some of these recipes with my followers because I'm always looking for new healthy recipes. So I'm really excited.
I can't wait to hear what you think.
I'm sure they're delicious.
Thank you.
Thank you again for taking time to share your story. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for giving me a chance to come on and chat with you.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.